Thank you very much, Jess, and it's a great pleasure to be here. The collaboration with Chris and his team at Taylor Street Advisory with Quantium has been really fantastic, and the presentation here is indeed a collaboration between the two organisations. I'll jump into it with a little history on data. We often look back to learn about the future, and it's actually pretty interesting to think that Captain Cook, when he arrived in Sydney all those years ago, he actually was a complete innovator, and he was using a new navigation system for the first time. He knew exactly where he was, and he was using data in an innovative way. The next slide picture there you can see is the famous story of the discovery of cholera being a waterborne illness. A lone voice at the time was a doctor in London, Dr. Snow, who went against all his peers, and he said it is a waterborne illness, and the conventional wisdom was that it was a airborne disease. In fact, the London government had committed a massive piece of infrastructure with the sewers of London because they thought that if you put the sewers in, you'd cure cholera. The sewers went in, the cholera continued. And it wasn't until he did something very simple in a very rudimentary, by our standards, data science manner. He plotted the deaths of people in London, and you could see from caused by cholera, and you could see that it showed that the closer you lived to a well, the more likely you were to die. And as soon as you saw that visualisation, it was obvious that it was the wells killing people. The next one is the collapse of Bris Connections up in Brisbane, a toll road disaster, and really the function of a poor, small data set. The board signed off on a recommendation. They thought that 130,000 people a day were going to use that toll road. The reality was closer to 30,000. They blew up $4 billion in capital, the board was fired, and it's still in litigation to this day. We can't afford to get these decisions wrong off using small, old-fashioned data. And the last one is, I was delighted to be in San Francisco last year and actually went in a driverless car. And the guy who's building the program for Google, he was taking me through what it is doing. This car is making 2 billion simultaneous decisions a second. And when I asked him, he said, "What's your timeline to bring it out?" He said, "My son is 15. I've promised Sergey, the founder of Google, that he'll never need a driver's license, and I will deliver on that promise." And these cars have done about 3 million miles running around San Francisco. You pull up the traffic lights, you can see them. They work, and they're on their way. And that is some of the marvels of data and analytics in one quick slide. So just to crack into what we are all about at Quantium. Quantium is a large data analytics business on a global scale. We're about 600 staff. We're the largest employer of mathematicians in Australia. And we bring together very, very powerful data sets. We have a relationship with National Australia Bank. It's all de-identified data, but there's billions of transactions in it. We have a very big relationship with Woolworths. Again, it's all de-identified, and there is trillions of data points in that. We have a partnership with CoreLogic, so this is all the house data about how big is the house, is it for sale, is it for rent, is there a solar panel on the roof? We have all of that data. We have every touch of the Foxtel remote, all triangulated back through this data soup. Then we apply human analytics and artificial intelligence to that through a technology stack that we've built is a best-in-breed, very large data sets. In fact, there's 23 trillion data points in this. When we think about Western Sydney, we've actually boiled it down. We've looked at 2 trillion data points to understand the research we're going to show in a moment. We bring all that together to create context and collaboration for whatever people want to know, to allow better decisions, greater efficiencies, and activation through a unique media ecosystem we've built with oOh!media, Facebook, Foxtel, and News Corp. So these are very, very big triangulations. What that allows us to do is change the way you understand location. So the old way was, looking at census information and surveys and samples and focus groups, which was sort of disconnected and a bit random. It was the best we had at the time. The new way is multidimensional, fully representative, and consistent in a new state of understanding to create unlimited real-time signals. So what we've got here, as that it comes through, is an analysis of Western Sydney, and that's how we've defined Western Sydney. I know there's various ways of doing it, but with our friends at Taylor Street, we landed on that definition. So let's get into the headlines. Western Sydney is younger, just a little younger, about 2 years younger, the average age being 35. But it is way over-indexed in families, dramatically over-indexed. So if you've got a product or service that families want, this is the place for you. They like value. If you bring a product or a service to Western Sydney, lead with value. They are value hunters and value will be rewarded. Very big over-index on living in houses. Most people now in Sydney don't live in houses. The house is being replaced by the apartment, but in Western Sydney, it's houses. We saw the initiative this morning announced by the dialogue on the possibility of the Commonwealth Games. Well, that looks like a good initiative. Sporting clubs are already overperforming in Western Sydney. And when Joe Hockey famously said that Western Sydney people don't drive much, he got that wrong. He didn't have 2 trillion data points to look at. Car accessories are very big in Western Sydney. Petrol is a very big deal in Western Sydney. In fact, 55% of all the petrol sold in Sydney is sold in Western Sydney. Now that is a big change when you think about driverless cars and the impact of electric cars and tax receipts and impact. There is something going to be very big there for Western Sydney in its favour. And they eat out a little less than average in Western Sydney. We mined the television viewing data, and I found this completely fascinating. Strong over-index on music video. Science and technology was really big. Now, this looks like a place where you want to earn and learn. Western Sydney has a high appetite for early adoption and new learning. Lifestyle channels, unsurprisingly, were a little bit under, and preschool was up. So again, that family flavour coming through everything they watch. Reality TV is doing pretty well in Western Sydney, and rugby league, well, this is the heartland with a 30% over average. The soccer teams are doing well as well. And AFL, while it's early days in the Western Sydney team, we looked specifically at last weekend's game against the Swans, and it was 400% up. So parochialism and winning is a good combination in Western Sydney. When I saw the headlines here of who's moving in to Western Sydney, what it made me think was if this was a country and you could buy its currency, you would. All the markers are for success. So Western Sydney is younger, more family, and more professional. And the people moving in are more of that. So we have a very powerful, changing growth dynamic coming into Western Sydney. If you take a look at Parramatta is like a shopping capital. Ralph Lauren, Victoria's Secrets, Adidas, all of these brands, we can see them over-indexing in retail in Parramatta. And the new movers are even more affluent. They're time poor. You can see them buying energy drinks and baby formula. I think that's a very interesting combination for those of you with small children. They are professional, more professional. They have lots of new families, and the data is telling us that they're time poor, technology savvy. You can see things like Uber Eats growing. You can see the tech companies indexed to do very well in Parramatta. Campbelltown, currently slightly older, more houses, less professional, but and over-index on pets, which is interesting. But the new movers coming in, like air travel. Now here's our first marker as we think about the airport. I think that's an amazing statistic that people are already moving, perhaps as a consequence of what they know is coming. They are tech savvy. We saw big drivers of Spotify and some of the high-tech apps being taken up by new movers to Campbelltown. and more professional and more students. All great encouraging signs of a thriving new economy. Camden, Camden, most people know, is a place with currently large homes, house-proud people. We see high spending in outdoor furniture and homemaking, that sort of thing, in the data we have. But the new movers in are dining out. They are online savvy, younger, more affluent. So you can just get this sense that we have a kind of a data-driven or technology-driven reboot as new people move in to Western Sydney. So I guess the big questions always come down to infrastructure, education, health and transport. And we've used the data to draw some insights of what we've seen here. So I'll get straight into it. On the screen is the census data from 2011 showing where children live who are aged 0 to 5. We then mined the NAB and Woolworths data to see where people are buying cots for the first time or baby bottles in Woolworths. And we have these factors to see, is the family or is there a new child in the house? So unsurprisingly, those maps sit pretty comfortably together, as you would hope they do. But then we've used the data to be more real time and tracked it over years. And you can see the changing shape there. And what it spits out is that there is dollar growth change happening for children's purchasing habits in Liverpool, Wattle Grove and Castle Hill. But we can see the nuanced change. We can see the trajectory of growth, which is something you can't do in small data sets. And we can see that Regent's Park, Wattle Grove and Padstow have very strong early trajectories of new child expenditures. So we think those markers, and we haven't plotted this against schools, which is something we could do, of course, and with school capacity, but you think there's markers here for the education sector about where new demand is being signalled. Healthcare. We plotted health expenditure, private health expenditure, and you can see there's a strong over-index in the eastern areas of Sydney. So health services in the west are sitting squarely or more squarely on the government's shoulders. And when you take that one step further and run, this is the gap analysis, so we can see people paying for health services above and beyond bulk billing. Again, this cost pressure is going to sit squarely on the government in Western Sydney. And we had a quick look, these are quick glances really, of just where the supply of medical GPs are versus the ageing population. And you can see here some signs of opportunity if you're in the space, and you call them out, is that there's a lot of doctors in Bankstown, Katoomba, Cabramatta, Penrith and Parramatta. But if you look at it through the lens of where 60 plus people who are going to be high needers of health service, you can see a different looking postcode map with Liverpool, Wentworthville, Campbelltown and Balcombe Hills and Blacktown. So we can see some mismatch between supply and demand in health on our horizon. This is probably my personal favourite. We've plotted over 1 billion trips in our data. So we can see where people live at a de-identified level, and we can see when they make a transaction. And we've plotted this is a cut of Liverpool for 60 plus people over a day. And you can see where they're spending their money. And we've run that 1 billion times through all of Australia. And it starts to be a very powerful tool in our view of how government and others can think about where is infrastructure most needed off a real-time demand basis. So let's take it one step further. As a team of actuaries, and some of our good team are right over here, we plot everything. And we've plotted the population growth of the suburbs with the time it takes to do the travelling. So this is the first time, to our knowledge, this has ever been seen. And this is off 1 billion trips. And what it does, it spots outliers straight away. So we can see Hoxton Park is growing quickly, but the travel times from Hoxton Park are very big. And we take that one step further. and we look inside of Hoxton Park, and we can see that 23% of all the shopping trips or all the purchases made in Hoxton Park are made in Hoxton Park. So a lot of people in Hoxton Park do spend money elsewhere. Now this is back to Minister Taylor's view around and the Prime Minister's view around 30-minute cities. You can start to see the data here of how this city, this town, or the suburb, is outside of that box. 10% of all the expenditure is being made in the CBD of Sydney, and the commute time is a staggering 1 hour and 10 minutes each way. So we can see need for infrastructure being driven off data, and this is the first time this sort of analysis has ever been released. We think it's a guiding tool for how we can think about creating smart cities. And as you couldn't have a summit on Western Sydney without looking at Badgerys Creek. So we can see where people live and where they fly. So which postcode the most people travel from to Las Vegas, or which postcode people travel the most to Melbourne, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we've plotted this against Badgerys Creek. And what it reveals, I'm not sure if it's a surprise or not. I really don't know whether everyone's expecting this sort of statistic. But what we saw was 30% of domestic and international travellers currently live closer to Badgerys Creek than Mascot. And we could also see from the previous slides that we've got people moving in to the west who are over-indexing on air services. So these are early signs that the airport is in for rapid growth. We always conclude our presentations with this slide. Well, I always conclude mine. The idea of if you have limited information and limited imagination, you will end up in that bottom corner. And there's good things to do in the bottom corner, but that's where the small things lie. And in the top right-hand corner, when you have limitless information and unlimited imagination, when you combine those two things, you can do anything. And that's really what we're about doing at Quantium. We want to work with people who want to aim in that top right box. Thank you for your attention. I hope you found that of interest. We do have a fact sheet, a more detailed fact sheet available. If you were interested, if you email info@quantium.com, that fact sheet will be emailed back to you. Thank you very much for your attention.